Pete Alonso versus Rowdy Tellez. Two first basemen with exceptionally different starts to their careers. The former burst onto the scene with a league-leading 53 home runs as a rookie, bagged 2 straight home run derby titles, and established himself as a consensus top 5 first baseman in the game. While the latter came up with no flashy rookie season, no major awards or accolades, and not even an everyday starter gig through his first 4 seasons as a big leaguer. So it's no surprise why most analysts and projection systems are predicting Rowdy to finish behind Pete in most major categories in 2023. But I am here to challenge that notion and show you why Rowdy might have another level to his game. Does he have what it takes to put together a Pete Alonso-esque season? I think he does, and let me tell you why. So to begin, what is a Pete Alonso-esque season? Through his first 3 full seasons, Pete Alonso has been that guy. You can pencil him in for 260, 350, 515, top 15 in homers, and like a 130 to 145 WRC+. This is what we call elite production, no doubt about it. And since he's so consistent year to year, we're going to call this the Pete standard and use it to gauge what elite performance looks like and see how well Rowdy stacks up. As a starting point, 2022 was Rowdy's first season as a qualified batter, and he slashed .219, .306, .461 with 35 homers and 10% better than league average. A reasonably productive season, but honestly not all that close to Pete's standard. This video isn't about 2022. We're trying to forecast future value, and there's a lot to like about Rowdy's skills at the plate that you can't see from his surface stats alone. So let's dive into why Rowdy is my breakout pick for 2023. Starting with the StatCast metrics, let's play a quick game. One of these StatCast pages belongs to Pete Alonso, and the other one belongs to Rowdy Tellez. Which is which? Alright, got your answer? If you said Pete Alonso is player B, then you're correct. But I bet they're closer than you initially thought. From a glance, both are great hitters, terrible base runners, and terrible defenders. But that's okay. These guys aren't getting paid for their home to first times or their slick glove work. These are 2 big, meaty first basemen whose jobs are to mash baseballs. So we don't need to put a ton of weight into that blue down at the bottom. Let's focus in on what they bring to the plate. Rowdy blasted 35 homers last year, tied for the 8th most in baseball. This shattered his previous career high, which begs the important question, can he do it again? I say yeah. His raw power is absolutely elite. Last season, Rowdy hit a baseball 116 miles an hour, which is harder than 98% of players can say. That puts him in the same class as Pete Alonso and ahead of guys like Austin Riley, Kyle Schwarber, and Mike Trout in terms of raw power. Now, raw power is great, but any good slugger knows that you need to combine that power with a good launch angle to do the real damage. For example, these 2 baseballs were hit at the exact same exit velocity, but with 2 very different launch angles. And as you can see, one landed on the moon and the other is a ground out. So if we want to measure how often a player is hitting the ball hard and in the air, we can take a look at their barrel rate. Barrel rate is one of the best stats we have to predict future slugging percentage. League-wide, barrels have produced a batting average over 800 and slugging over 2,000. In 2022, Rowdy and Pete were both in the top 15% of the league in barrel rate, with Rowdy actually outperforming Pete. Lucky for us, barrel rate is pretty sticky year to year, which means that we can expect both Rowdy and Pete to continue destroying baseballs next year. And thus, Rowdy Tellez's top 10 finish in home runs was no fluke. Alright, so he passes the MASH test. The next question is, does he walk, and how often does he strike out? It's pretty common for these big power guys to have high strikeout numbers because they're always swinging for the fences. And a slugger's ability to walk can honestly make or break their career. Pete hovers right around a 10% walk rate and a 20% strikeout rate, both good figures compared to the rest of the league, and especially while providing the power that he does. Rowdy last year walked 10.4% of the time and struck out 20.2% of the time. This really surprised me when I started digging into these players. For a guy who hit just .219 last season, and honestly just seems like that all-or-nothing type hitter, I thought Rowdy would have way higher strikeout numbers than he does. But Rowdy doesn't completely sell out for power like Joey Gallo or Kyle Schwarber. He's so strong he doesn't really need to, which allows him to protect the plate more and put the ball in play. Hopefully you're starting to see some of these underlying skills that make Rowdy a really complete hitter. So now you may be asking, well, if they're so similar, then why did Rowdy's offensive output last year look like this, while Pete's looked like this? Funnily enough, it's because of every sabermetrician's favorite stat: batting average. As we mentioned earlier, Pete Alonso hit 271 last season while Rowdy Tellez hit just 219, and I'll admit it, that is not good. But I like his chances to outperform that this year. Rowdy hit into the shift a lot last season and was one of the unluckiest players in baseball on balls in play. He had the second lowest BABIP in the majors last season, hitting just 215 on balls in play. Now, players of Rowdy's body type and sprint speed do not typically have high BABIPs, but 215 is just ridiculously low. Over his career, he's shown to be more of a 255 guy, and that honestly just sounds way more realistic to me. So all Rowdy has to do is bounce back to his career norms, and he's already closing the gap significantly with Pete. But there's another factor at play this year. I mentioned before that Rowdy hit a lot of balls in the shift. Rowdy was shifted 78% of the time last season versus Pete's 41%. As I'm sure you've heard by now, the shift is largely going away in 2023, which should benefit big pull hitters like Rowdy Tellez. I think we could see Rowdy's average tick up another 10 or 20 points just from the new rules. So don't be surprised if Rowdy's batting 260 or 270 next season, and that would meet the Pete standard for average. If Rowdy's able to get his batting average up, this ugly 306 on base percentage is going to go up too. Rowdy actually walked more often than Pete last season, so we could easily see him around that 350 mark. And finally, the slugging numbers. Well, once again, you might be surprised, but last season, Rowdy already slugged like Pete. I mean, looking at the numbers, you might say, no he didn't, but the difference in their slugging percentages is basically just Pete hitting more singles. We can look at isolated power to see how much a player is slugging relative to their batting average. Players who hit for high average but without much power will have a low ISO, and players who hit for high power but low batting average will have a high ISO. Last season, their ISOs were separated by just 4 points. This tells me that Rowdy is hitting extra base hits and homers just as often as Pete, and with some more singles coming his way next season, that 520 figure should be well within reach. So hopefully I've made the case that if things were to go right for Rowdy, he could hit like Pete Alonso next year. But to be fair, we should also probably have a look at what might stand in his way. In terms of playing time, Pete is elite. Last year, he played 160 games, and with that, he's able to put up a lot of volume. Last year, Rowdy was the Brewers' primary first baseman, but you might see Luke Voit, Owen Miller, or Mike Brasso play some games at first on Rowdy's off days. So even if Rowdy is slugging like Pete from a rate basis, his counting stats and home runs might not be enough to surpass. As for platoon splits, Pete is super consistent hitting righties and lefties, and Rowdy has been too over his career. But in 2022, we did see less power versus lefties than we're used to from him, so it'll be key to see if that trend continues next season. Admittedly, a lot would need to go right for Rowdy Tellez to have a better season than Pete Alonso next season, but I don't think it's crazy that they put up similar numbers on a rate basis. Rowdy's coming off his first full season as an everyday starter, so there's a lot for him to build on top of, and their power and bat-to-ball skills are both elite, so we're just going to have to see how it plays out. I'm predicting a 265 average, 350 on base, and 520 slugging, with 37 homers in 2023, which would undoubtedly be a career year and huge for the Brewers' playoff chances. If you made it to the end of this video, please drop a like. I put a lot of work into assembling all this data for you guys, and let me know who your breakout picks are in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.